My name is Vimala Pashupathy. I'm the Associate Dean of the Hofstra University Honors College and an Associate Professor in the English Department. And so we'll go ahead and get started. I want to begin by welcoming and giving thanks to our speakers, Dr. Erika Lin and Mr. Keith Hamilton Cobb, and all of you in the audience. And those attending include many excellent scholars whose work I admire, and we have people from 35 different states in America and at least 2 other countries. I also want to thank more specifically a few people who were instrumental in making sure this event happened. And first and foremost, a big thanks to Athleen Collins and her team at the Hofstra Cultural Center, especially Johanna Farrell. Second, a hearted thanks goes to Warren Frazina, the Dean of the Hofstra University Honors College. And I also want to give a quick shout out to those who were involved in our now postponed conference on Shakespeare in the Globe, both the scholars who submitted paper proposals and those who are on the planning committee, including Vice President Melissa Connolly, James Colvin, Royston Coppinger from the Department of Drama and Dance. And I wanted to say the names of 2 people who are no longer with us, but whose work is often with me when I think about literature and race. My late colleague and scholar of African American literature, Dr. Jennifer Henton, and an exceptional Hofstra student named Masai Jones. I know that they would be especially excited to hear from our 2 speakers. And those speakers, we have Dr. Erika Lin, who's an associate professor in the PhD program in theater and performance at the Graduate Center, CUNY. She's just finished a term on the board of trustees of a major professional organization of Shakespeare scholars, the Shakespeare Association of America, whose members include many people in the audience today. Her 2013 book, Shakespeare and the Materiality of Performance, received the prestigious David Bevington Award for Best New Book in Early Drama Studies. It relies on a stunning variety of archival documents to recover the materiality of immaterial performances. That is, things like dancing, wounding, fighting, and other acts that are given little description in texts. Her focus on what actors' bodies were doing on the early modern stage makes her an excellent complement for Mr. Keith Hamilton Cobb, whose play, American Moor, tells the story of a specific kind of body in the 20th and 21st centuries, a body inhabited by a person who is at once reducible and irreducible to, in his own words, a large black man. Mr. Cobb is a graduate of NYU's Tisch School of the Arts with a career that includes a wide range of roles on stage and screen. You're all here today because you're astounded by his facility with a great many Shakespearean roles, including my favorite, Hotspur, and others that make brief and intriguing appearances in American Moor. I suppose that some of you might have also come because you know him from turns on shows like Young and the Restless or Andromeda, or maybe like me, you skipped a college class or 2 to watch Noah Kiefer on All My Children with your roommates back in the mid-1990s. It's especially amusing now that as a college professor myself, I've canceled my own Shakespeare class meeting this week so that students could come watch this event and view American Moor. Almost a year ago exactly, I was fortunate to be able to take a group of students to see American Moor at the Cherry Lane Theater. And I will never forget that after the show, Mr. Cobb graciously stayed for quite a long time to talk with the students and take pictures with them in a group and individually. This opportunity required some waiting, and while the students were lining themselves up, I was hanging further back with all the anxiety you might expect of somebody who had to get 14 people back to Penn Station to catch the Long Island Railroad before 11 o'clock. From a distance, I kept my eye on the line, and after a bit, I noticed that my students' faces were shifting from looks of excitement and anticipation to something that looked like embarrassment and concern. And at that point, I walked up closer to see what was making them shift so uncomfortably. And it turns out that the entire time almost, Mr. Cobb had been speaking to one person who held a notebook. I see you nodding, Jackie. And this person was either a theater critic or a journalist, and their body language and tone were a little bit oppositional. It seemed to me that we were getting to see a low-rent encore presentation of American Moor, where a white person with the markers of authority demanding the Black actor, and in this case, the very creator of the play we'd just seen, answer to their specifications. This person didn't seem to be aware that they were recapitulating a dynamic that the play explodes, and I started to get very anxious. But then I looked at all the students, and they were all exchanging looks with one another that showed their misery, exasperation, and outrage, and with a depth of understanding that the play had taught them. This experience gets at the heart of why American More is simultaneously deeply critical and exuberantly hopeful, as the great Kim F. Hall describes it in her elegant introduction to the play. And these are also the poles of experience that Mr. Cobb himself invokes in the notes that he supplies for staging the script. What's this? In it, he says, the audience should and will find itself playing many parts. It's not intended that this process leave them in comfort. But throughout, the actor must return to them often with love and with an open heart. He must return to engage them as travelers on this road with him, because that is what, in deigning to sit and experience this play, they have agreed to be, most of them. He continues, this does not mean that he should mitigate any of his well-earned emotional expression, for what would he be without it? His audience will most clearly see his regard and responsibility for them in the ways he returns to them. So with this powerful direction guiding us, I'm going to give things over to our two speakers, who will each offer some comments about their background, training, and anything else that has shaped their perspectives on Shakespeare. And then they'll embark on a conversation together. At any point, you in the audience can pose questions, and I may interject with these questions occasionally, but if not, sometime after 5:30, if our speakers haven't already discussed them in the course of their dialogue, I will ask Mr. Cobb and Dr. Lin to address as many as we can as time permits. So thank you. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Vim. Keith, do you want to go first, or shall I?
What would you prefer? Go ahead. No, please speak. You first.
Well, I mean, I just want to thank Vim and Atheline and everybody at Hofstra, first off, for being such amazing hosts for this event. And thank you so much for all of the warmth and energy that you've put into organizing this event. So thank you. My own background is of a scholar of Shakespeare. I was trained in English department, but now I'm teaching in theater. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about was not just theater as scripted drama, but also performance. And in theater as a discipline, unlike in English or other areas, we often talk about it not only as stage plays, but also as broader action, ceremonial action, festive action, but also everyday action, how we behave in the world. And so some of my current research really deals with this because I'm thinking about festive practices, May games, Morris dancing, Robin Hood plays, cross-dressing, things that happened at holidays and festivals in early modern England and their relationship to community building in that era, how these were ways in which performance was ubiquitous at that time. And then it starts to get commodified and crystallized into an entity that we can understand today as theater as such, as an aesthetic and institutionalized entity. But the audience then was performing for absolutely everybody who were also amateur performers themselves, because they didn't just get dressed up at Halloween, which is coming up soon for us, but also at other holidays around the year, Shrovetide, May games, and so forth. So I wanted to just say a couple words about some of my thinking on this, because this kind of work really ties in with some of my larger professional work as a member of the Shakespeare Association of America's Board of Trustees, which I just rotated off, but also in other academic administrative contexts. And so one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how academic institutions reproduce themselves and how we create cultural change in them, because I have only very modest goals, which is wholesale cultural change around issues of race and inclusion. So among the things that I've been thinking about is the relationship between text and performance in this context. And what I mean by text is not just a dramatic text, but also the kinds of informal and formal documents that we use to guide our institutionalization, like constitutions and bylaws and that sort of thing. And one of the things that I've come to is the way in which the production of these texts is what transforms communities into institutions. But it has occurred to me often that in fact, these institutions are also constituted through acts of performance, everyday performance. And so there are often these moments where individuals gather before they regularize and decide, hey, let's form an organization, let's write some bylaws, or let's write some guidelines of what we're going to do, a mission statement, and so on. And so performance precedes institutionalization, but it's also how it continues long after it's established. And so this offers a way for especially scholars of color, and in our national context, you can see how some of this might work as well, to intervene, because we are often in positions where we don't have institutional power, and we have to be very careful about how it is that we intervene in order not to compromise our own safety, as well as to maintain our agency and authority in the most effective ways. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about is how these particular modes of performance then offer an opportunity for us to actually intervene in those institutions, because the way bylaws and constitutions and so forth are written often is about, they follow a practice which has been codified over time into a procedure that is, quote unquote, how we usually do things, okay, and a standard for behavior. And one of the things that is of interest to me is the way in which this, how we did things in the past, or how we usually do things, produces a felt connection to a community history. It's that felt part of community that actually matters to most people. We all want to be part of a social group. And so we often defer to the people who say, oh, this is how it's usually done, especially people who have been around for a long time. But this felt connection to the past often is a problem if you're trying to change things, change institutions for the present. And so one of the things that I've come to is the way in which we can actually perform the institution that we want to see into being. And that there's a number of ways that we can do this. And so here are just a couple of thoughts that we might talk about further during discussion of how that can happen. One of them is to think not only about what has been done in the past, always deferring to precedent and therefore giving authority to the institution as it already exists, but rather to perform what is obvious and right as a common sense thing to do in the future. A model for race and inclusion in a number of factors. The other idea that I've had is that we can leverage how institutional affiliation grows out of these affective communities. Okay, so our interpersonal social interactions produce various affective responses. People want to feel good. People want to feel part of something bigger than themselves. And in doing so, one of the ways that we can do that is to basically use that to re-perform the institution we want to have into being. We perform the utopia, the heaven on earth that we would like to see. And so then the last thing I'll say is just that in this way, consensus is ultimately your friend. Okay, there's some talk right now about whether there's going to be a peaceful transition of power on the national level. Obviously, that's problematic in so many ways. One of the things that is really useful is to think not in terms of coups, but in terms of how to genuinely change hearts and minds, to build that sense of consensus and collaboration, even when you doubt its existence. Okay, and this is the key point, because part of what happens is that I'm not saying you shouldn't challenge people on their views or eject them sometimes from the community, but performing consensus literally in the act of performance defines what community is. And so it re-performs it each time it happens. And so then this performance of community, of we are all one, we are all together, we are an inclusive community, right? And these are our social norms. We don't brook that kind of behavior here. Be part of us, be with us. This is how it is that performance of community becomes institutionalized as part of institutionalized memory and then can eventually get codified into documents and policy. So anyhow, those are my current thoughts. ties a little bit to some of my work in my second book that I'm writing right now, but also in terms of a lot of things I've been thinking about it in terms of administration. So we can talk about all of that and more, but let me hand over the stand to Keith.
I've got questions about a lot of that. That's intense. Thank you. We'll talk. Hi. Hello to all of you. Thank you, Vamala. And Hofstra for doing this. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to. So one thing that American More has done over its coming up on 8 years of performance life and development and change and growth has allowed me to make contact with these minds far more forward thinking and brilliant than my own. I get to sit in rooms like this and act like I belong here. But I'm an actor at the root of all of this. I was only ever an actor, or as long as I can remember, or wanted to be. And if you ask me anytime, if you ask me right now, or I think probably any future time in my being and development, what are you missing? What are you missing in this moment? I would probably say I am missing playing Shakespeare's grandest characters, or the ones that are grandest to me, because I have missed so many of them in my growth. There was no Romeo, there was no Hamlet, there was no Hotspur, and I love them all. And there are reasons for that, as there are reasons for everything. And they are reasons that stem from what I am and what I am not. Starting with what I am not or might not have been at any particular time, at any particular place, in aspiring to do those roles. What I might not have been was good enough. There is competition, lots of competition. My father likes to say, 1 million mice and one piece of cheese. And being good and being able to compete is important. And I cannot say with impunity that at any point in that process, I was the best choice. But then there's the part having to do with what I am. And that is large and black and smart and forceful in thought and voice and presence. And we can't go back and discern what part of this was you not being able to compete, and what part was you frightening the people in the room because you were bringing something to it for that Hotspur, that Hamlet, that Romeo, that the overarching structure that owns and administrates white American theater could not or did not want to see or consider. This work with American More that some of you have been able to see in watching the Wanamaker archival, and I thank you for having a look. All this work with American More stems from that. Stems from I think all Black rage in America stems from wanting to be seen and understood and respected and taken seriously and heard. And I say again and again in rooms like these and whoever I'm talking to, as the country goes, as the culture goes, so goes everything in it. So every aspect of American culture is impacted by these issues of race that we are navigating, and certainly the American theater. So then there's this play, right? And it's having this attention put on it right now because of this interesting confluence of COVID and this social justice conflagration that has happened in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and various and sundry. And this is an interesting phenomenon because we did a production off Broadway. We pushed this boulder uphill for 7 years and did this production off Broadway. We closed it just about this time a year ago, and it was managed in such a way that not enough people in New York ever knew it was there, right? And if you talk to people, we closed in October, if you talk to people in November, very few New Yorkers knew that that was a thing. certainly among the academia and the scholarship that exists on the internet, everyone knew because they had been talking about this play for several years prior. But the average theater goer was not aware, and we didn't move on from there. And there was a month or so where I was trying to figure out what to do next, and I turned my attention to the publishing. But then COVID struck, and all of the theaters shut down. And theaters need to be seen. They need to make work in order to remain relevant, in order to remain visible, in order for anybody to care that they are a theater. They've got to be, creating work. So everything moves on to Zoom, and people are creating whatever form of relevance they can make on Zoom in that theatrical medium. Then we have this international social justice conflagration. And it was almost ready-made for theaters to come with their ally statements and say, now we have this relevant thing to talk about on Zoom. We're all going to talk about this. We're all going to get together and do our Zoom thing. And all of a sudden, American More becomes part of that discussion. And on the one hand, I'm thrilled about that, because I think it has been my focus to perpetuate the discussion. I don't know how this play got written. I think it's a brilliant play. And I don't say that about anything else that I have done in my own body of work, but I think this is a brilliant play. I don't know what ancestors I channeled to write it, but my job is to continue to support it and perpetuate the myriad discussions that it engenders. So I have been doing that. And to that extent, this Zoomosphere and the need to discuss these issues and make them issues of relevance has become very important. So that's me. That's why I'm here. Moving this to the next place vis-a-vis the American theater getting its act together and making theater that is not only more inclusive, more representative of the American culture at large, more of it synthesized through BIPOC bodies and minds and hearts remains to be seen. We're waiting for the smoke of COVID to clear to see what part of this stuff was virtue signaling and what part of it was actually let's make some changes, and as Erika says, begin to codify them as the new normal. This is how we do things here. I'm waiting to see, but in the meantime, I'm just showing up. So here I am. I showed up.
No, that's great, Keith. I really connect with you about the kind of holding our breath in a way to try and wait and see how things are going to shake out. Because one of the things I was thinking over the summer, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, right, is that there have been a lot of people who for, years, decades, centuries, but, I'm thinking more recent history, right, have been working really hard and talking to people and kind of beating our heads against a brick wall about these issues. Suddenly, we have the this summer's protests, the horrible George Floyd video, and suddenly everything kind of changes, right? And I admit that I have a kind of cynicism, right, born from long experience of whether people are genuinely committed to change. And I'm wondering what your experience of that is, and in terms of how American More has been received before and after the summer, and then what the hopes are, as well as the possibilities of the future, and then how we can actually, foment that discussion through American More and through other kinds of modes of community building.
I share your cynicism. And I knew that before we started. We talked about that before. I've had more than half a life to watch America do what it does, with me in it, what it has, how I have had to navigate that. So, I don't hold out tons of hope, but at the same time, it boots us nothing to give up or to grow complacent or to, there's nothing for me to do but get out of bed every morning and do the things that I do, right? And even if if we're affecting people in little ways, we're doing something. We're honoring purpose, and moving forward. We haven't gotten American More to the place where it generates a national discussion. yet. It hasn't reached that critical mass, and we don't know what that national discussion will do once it does. In small or in smaller, we have seen consistently broadly diverse audiences respond in hugely, you call them positive, moving and unusual and visceral ways to this work, and returning to see it again and to take it apart in classrooms, and to dissect it, coming the third and fourth time and saying, I never saw that moment. This thing that we just did it with Red Bull, where we were just reading it, people showed up and said, you know, because it was all on camera, Zoom lent something to the intimacy where moments popped that from a distance on stage I was never able to see. So again, there's the newness of it, and I think great live theater does that as well, right? Is ever evolving, you know, and that it should be the focus to evolve it and grow it and look for what has not been seen before. Yeah, does that sort of get at your question? I start to go, you know, I mean, there's so many directions to go. I start to go and I end up going off down some road and forget where the highway was, you know, so.
No, absolutely. No, I was thinking about that because American More is the kind of play that brings together so many different threads. It's an individual story, but it's also the story of our country and its relationship to history, right? And that history includes not only US history, but also Shakespeare as some sort of cultural progenitor. And one of the things that is really amazing about it is its kind of multi-layeredness. And that multi-layeredness is not just in the play itself, but also extends to the community that starts to have a conversation around it, right? And so, you know, one of the things that I've been thinking about is the relationship between the substance of the topic of race, where we can talk about Othello, we can talk about the particularities of some particular artwork. But if we think of that artwork as bounded and we leave our thoughts about it at the theater door, there's a problem, right? The real goal of art, I think, is to reach out and actually connect to the larger world and start not just a national conversation, but also to produce actual genuine cultural change. Mm-hmm. And to really make that happen. And so, you know, so anyhow, so I've been thinking about those kinds of questions in terms of academics, as you and many of you in this room know, love to talk about things. We talk and talk and talk, and our faculty meetings sometimes last a long time because there's more talking, okay? And we think that all things can be solved by conversation, right? And I think that there is, obviously, I'm very invested in those interpersonal interactions and conversation, right? But also, like, I wonder to what extent we're confusing conversation with actual institutional change, right? And what the relationship is between them, right? And so one of the things you dramatize in American More is the difficulty of having that conversation. An actor who's auditioning for a director, the director holds all the power. The actor may or may not get the gig. They need the gig, right? That's an institutional problem, right? And so, you know, I would love to hear how you see American More participating in that, you know, so that we can create a conversation and then also actually use that conversation to leverage to actually produce genuine institutional change.
Well, again, I think that the conversation will generate itself if we reach a critical mass of visibility for this play, because it does have this striking effect that people are really impacted by this play, because and this is because it's just such a unique piece of theater. They have not seen the argument framed in this way. They have not seen it put to them in this theatrical mode, and so it utilizes a couple of tricks that kind of gets in under the radar and people find themselves in the middle of it, being affected in ways that they were never affected by this conversation or by this argument, you know, and it moves forward from there. And I think that's a statement about how we need to. I mean, as long as this, you know, this is all of this, and I'm certainly, you know, is a conversation about where the money is and where the money goes. A culture of American capitalism, which is inseparable from American racial bias, right? And all of the structure upon which the culture was built, you know, is you know, if we're going for the money, then we'll do Frozen until the cows come home, you know. We'll do Frozen and Harry Potter, and you know, and there'll be some straight plays in there, and maybe some good things in them, but they will be very specified, codified through a particular lens, you know, and they will be done in a time frame that is hyper aware of the man hours spent and the cost of the space, and you know, and we will be making this thing with the issues that you bring up at the bottom of the pile. You know, what is art for? What are we? What are we in service to? With making art? Well, let's decide that first. And if we're in service to the things that you were speaking of, then we've got to find another way to do it. And I think we're forever fighting City Hall in doing that. You know, it's the City Hall in this city. You know, how does the city change? Where's the cart and where's the horse? You know. How does the city change, right? If a piece like American More shows up and has made this noise, and the reason it hasn't made a bigger noise yet in 7 years are because of many of the issues that arise in the play.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there's that deep irony. We've gotten it this far, you know. How do we continue to create, to grow that noise so that it is undeniably the topic of discussion, you know, the discussion on all the various levels that you're describing, you know, in scholarship, among audience members of all stripes, dinner conversation, cocktail conversation, in articles, you know, in the press.
Yeah, no, I think that's great.
Go ahead.
I'm just excited about what you're saying, so I'm jumping in here, but I didn't mean to interrupt you if you wanted to continue.
No, go ahead. No, please.
Yeah, it's one of the things that when we started out this conversation, we talked about, you know, our cynicism, our mutual cynicism about virtue signaling, right? Virtue signaling is using public speech to mask and act as if conversation takes the place of genuine material change, right? And as you were just pointing out, it's where's the money coming from and where is it going to, right? And then there's a relationship between that and changing hearts and minds, and so there's a certain kind of speech that's public speech that can be leveraged in order to produce that kind of systemic change, right? Dear White American Theater, right? The letter signed by many, many people, right? Saying this is what we want to see, concrete institutional changes. Who's in positions of power? Who has, you know, control over the budget and so forth, right? Whose stories are we telling? Right? Because who are the gatekeepers to decide which stories we're going to actually put on stage? But then at the same time, so speech is public speech in that sense, right? Can be leveraged in order to produce change. And then there's the hard labor, the thing that all of us need to participate in, which is those one-to-one conversations, those one-to-one interactions, right? People of color you don't get a choice. You just got to do it regardless. It's not, you can opt out. I mean, you can try to opt out. And this is why self-care is a political act, right? Because it's exhausting having to do that all the time. But nevertheless, like it's those dynamics are part of what actually produces the change on a substantive level. So it's not just, let's have yet another conversation or discussion about something in that public way, which then becomes virtue signaling, but a genuine conversation exchange. And what I love about American More is the way in which it's actually saying, hear me, right? The actor says to the director in the play, hear me, let's talk about it. Oh, now is not the time because we're having a 5-minute audition, right? When is the time then? A real exchange. What is it like to be you? What is it like to be me? How can I learn? How can you learn? How can we all be part of a community where we learn from each other, right? That seems to be one of the things in the play that's truly deeply moving, is wanting real conversation about this, right? The director is saying, the director doesn't want to hear a Black man's actual experience in America today, right? And so, one of the possibilities is for public speech to at least open the doors, to open the ears of people so that they can at least listen and listen with their hearts, right? And then in that moment of listening, right, genuinely change something internal, which can then produce and result in actual change down the road systemically. Because for somebody to let go and say, all right, I'm the artistic director of whatever, or I finally, clawed my way up amongst all the, how did you put it? The mice and the cheese that your father, your father said, right? To claw your way up to the top, to do this play, right? And theater being what it is, right? The directors are also clawing their way, fighting other mice for the cheese, right? To say, I'm going to give up my cheese, right? To a director of color, to give them the opportunity to do a play and tell a story, right? And it comes from a deeper place, a place of real change in the heart. And so anyhow, so these are some of the things that I've been thinking about and that your play prompts, I think, in our conversation.
Erika, one of the myriad problems is that, as we know, racism, American racism, is layered, and at the bottom, there is simple access to education, right? Which attrites ability to compete. You can go a layer below that and say, access to food, which allows somebody who, even if they got an education, didn't have the energy to study, and just, several tiered. So we get to this place where we've made it this far, and we have the tools and we have the skills to throw down with anybody else. And you have this structure of power at the top. And this structure that has been put in place and meticulously cared for over these 400 plus years instills, I think, a great, huge sort of unlivable guilt in the cumulative community, in the American community. And that guilt is so large and so painful that issues of race become almost impossible to discuss. They are so inconvenient to discuss, And I don't know if there's a middle ground, but I think that, if I use the example of an artistic director, I want to say you don't have to give up your artistic directorship, but you certainly have to hand over the stewardship of this play to this person. We can do the virtue signaling. We can, diversity is not necessarily a good thing if it means you're just putting Black bodies in your plays and not brown bodies in your plays and not giving them, and it doesn't mean anything. And we're all onto that. It's bullshit, right? Certainly, if you take a play like this, the money machine of recycling Shakespeare's canon in the regional theaters is silly to me. I'd say, how many times you're going to do Hamlet and try to put some kind of thing on it, right? So it's unique, and we're going to talk about. If you really want to put a thing on Othello, then let some Black folks figure out what this play is about and have a look at that. Give them money, give them time, give them resources to get. And that's not as hard to do, or at least it shouldn't be, unless you're afraid of what they'll come up with. Unless you're afraid that they'll show you something that you can't sell to your board or your donorship, or that's the thing that I think at that level, I think I get very impatient and intolerant. I think I want to say to the artistic directors, you can do it. You can do that much. You know, you don't have to have the discussion yourself, but you can do that much. You can trust that this is where we are for real. Throw down for real, right? At this juncture, right? And make something new. Do something with this friggin' play that everybody hasn't seen a million times, you know. Don't just put the Black people in it, but figure out what, you know, there's also this peopling plays with brown people that in no way honor the world of the play, right? And that's a whole new set of discussions. What, you know, we can have Black people throughout Othello. And you can argue that there were brown people in Venice and Black people in Venice, and there were, but they generally aren't in this play. This play is about the isolation of a single man, right? So if you start making Black Amelias, which, you know, that's become a trope, right? That's become, she's become part of the Black canon, you know. You can do that, and black Cassios and Black, you know, then you are obfuscating all the genuine human interactions in this play that we are trying to grow and bolster in real ways in order to follow the trajectory of this man to the ultimate conclusion in a way that actually we walk away saying it could have happened like that, and I believe it, and that's powerful. You know, this is another discussion about, you know, our American evolution with entertainment. Certainly with Shakespeare, I think fewer and fewer audiences have the tools to discern whether or not they're watching good Shakespeare or bullshit Shakespeare. I mean, I just think that it's Shakespeare. You know, Harry Potter one night, and it's Shakespeare. You know, and we all go home and go have drinks or whatever it is. You know, and we need to do better. We need to do better with that as well.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, you're right about that, about the good Shakespeare, bad Shakespeare. So long as it's Shakespeare, we'll put our money in it, right? And you know, it's a real opportunity, I think. Those of us who are in the Shakespeare biz, as it were, right, have the opportunity, as you said, to tell a different story, leveraging that cultural capital that we have, that Shakespeare's name brings with it, okay? Because the other option is actually tell stories by Black and brown people, right? That people of color can tell their own stories, but those plays don't sell. Okay, this is the problem, right? People will be like, whatever, I would like to go see Othello again, okay, and or Hamlet or whatever, okay, as opposed to, you know, I would like to go see an original play written by a contemporary artist of color. But if we were to, as you said, actively say, all right, you know, here's a Shakespeare play. You figure out what story you can tell using this as raw materials, right? And, you know, as you said, like, you know, simply throwing actors of color on stage isn't going to solve anything, right? That's been going on for a long time. And then it almost has a counter, it's a version of virtue signaling.
Oh, indeed. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, look how diverse our cast is. Look how diverse our production is, right? Look at our production team, also diverse, right? Well, it's better than nothing, okay? Because you're putting some paychecks in people's pockets, right? But in addition to that, let's get creative. Come on, isn't this what this is supposed to be about, right? The theater as an opportunity to do something, you know, creative and interesting, right? And you know, that you can tell stories, that you can hear things in the words, you can stage things in ways that you would never anticipate, and just a subtle shift in tone or in delivery or in gesture, or let alone the larger kind of questions of mise-en-scène and blocking and so on, right? Or design, right? Even in the little things that, to be frank, don't cost extra. You know, you can actively change what the story is, right? And that comes through in American more in the moments when you talk, when in the audition scene, you're trying to deliver the line the way the white director wants it to be delivered. You hear the obsequious delivery in opposition to the more reserved, like you can hear it, right, in the tone, right? Because you're a very talented actor, Keith. And so part of what, you know, I wonder is, you know, one of the questions, the open questions that I have is, which is better to say, okay, we're going to use Shakespeare's name, right? Can we double bill it so that you, for two for the price of one, okay? We're going to have two plays tonight. One of them happens to be called Othello, quote unquote. Okay, how you want to cut that script, how you want to, like, you know, adjust it, right? Take a cue from Shakespeare and, you know, the way in which scripts were ready to be sliced and diced left and right with the multiple versions, right? There's no reason why it couldn't then also be Othello and double billed tonight with American Moor, you know? Now hear this story and experience the Shakespeare in a different way. So use the Shakespeare to bring them in, right? And then meanwhile, you feed them some stories by contemporary artists of color, right? You know, these, I mean, because otherwise there's a problem, because by constantly just producing the Shakespeare, we end up perpetuating the problem, perpetuating the cycle.
The interesting challenge that gives rise to, and we had been, there had been a moment, I think a year or two ago, where there were a bunch of scholars on the Shake race and various other places, sort of petitioning Ashland to do Othello, American Moor, and Toni Morrison's Desdemona in rep. And I said, well, if you're doing Othello, if you're doing American Moor and Desdemona, it puts such pressure to create an Othello that isn't just, you know, another masturbation with regard to, you know, that play. I don't know that anybody would take that up, but it is the kind of challenge that can really move the needle if you're ready to jump in, right? If you're ready to do that, if you're ready to take those chances. There's no, we have gotten past in our need to make money with our theater, lots and lots of money with our theater. Nobody can afford to screw it up.
Yeah,
right?
You can't take a risk anymore, right?
Nobody can afford to take chances or to experiment, and we have to figure out a way around that. You know?
Well, this is where, like, Zoom has a possibility, a potential for, if the pandemic goes on for a while, right? There's some potential here because production costs are lower in Zoom in many ways. And so I don't know what the intake is either, but Keith, I know you're working on a new project. Can you tell us more about that, about your version?
Yeah, you know, so yeah, I always refer to my lifelong, adult lifelong relationship with Othello as Othello in the ether, you know, because you're a big black guy, it's always there, right? You're a big black actor, so it's always present in one form or another, always being thought about, always being talked about. And it's given rise to me, you know, looking at it in various ways, and in great extent, you know, creating this particular play. And I thought that in the trajectory towards what we hoped would be a Broadway run, the next logical question would be, well, what about Othello? What about when do we see your Othello? When do we see? Are you going to direct an Othello? And I thought, well, if people are going to ask me that question, and I'm going to say, if I want to say yes, I better come up with a version of the play that I think can be played. And that's not just Othello's performance. I watched Adrian Lester in the National production not too long ago do, you know, as a brilliant actor that he is, do everything that Shakespeare threw at him in that play. You know, he played that to death. He was brilliant. But the play sucks, right? The play sucks. He can be as brilliant as he wants, right? And not win with that play. How can I fix that? No, that was my thought. So COVID had struck and I was stuck up in my house just like everybody else. And I said, well, let me start to work on this. Let me take out my various editions, the scholarly tomes and see what people are saying and wanting to do. And I just began to, I downloaded a version from the net and I just began to edit. A lot of this is taking stuff away. You know, a lot of language that doesn't need to be there in this play that creates a much shorter, much more tighter arc, dramatic arc. I tell people I'm trying to rewrite Shakespeare as if it was Eugene O'Neill, which is to say, the playwright, you had copious stage directions because he wanted you to know what he felt that the characters were doing and feeling in every moment, how they were shifting their eyes, you know. And I thought, well, maybe if I can do that, at least the written version for a reader, they will get where I'm coming from, you know. Certainly if I directed it, I would know how to translate that, and probably any good director would know how to translate that to a stage. Very focused on trying to take out anything that did not seem genuinely humanly motivated in this play, because there's so much, right? There's so much that has nothing to do with anything, like no human being you or I know or would be, you know, would behave in these ways, you know. And it takes mental and intellectual gymnastics for people to come up with reasons why this play works, right? As written, you know. And they do. They tell me, well, if he wasn't, you know, if he never really slept with her, and you know, he had this problem, and maybe he has erectile dysfunction, and you know, that's not in the play, right? that's not in the play. But if we want to create those stories, if we want to create those characters that have those things in them, then let's figure out how to do that. Let's make that, what does a man who has done nothing but fight wars since the time he was 7, who all of a sudden shows up and wants to get married and join polite society, look like, and how does he behave, and where is he in the arc of his life that dictate the stakes of that? What is he after, and what is he up against? What physical ailments, what mental ailments? Does he have PTSD? I think he does. I think that Othello hits the stage with a host of problems that he is covering, you know. And I want to see that. I want the character exploration, not just of Othello, but all the characters, you know. Let's figure out what they're about. We don't have to change their race or their sex or anything else about them. We just have to really look at them and be honest about why they're there. I think there's a lot that's hypertextual in terms of performing a play like this, which is to say, for instance, Iago shows up in Act 2 in the first temptation scene, and it's very much out of the blue. You know, everything's fine up until there. It's very much out of the blue. And yeah, as written, I tell people it's kind of like Bugs Bunny duping Yosemite Sam, you know. But this man would know better. And I think you or me or anybody else would say, why are you pushing so hard for this? What's in this for you? I'm watching you, right? Maybe what you say is true. You put some shit in my head and I'm not fond of you for it. And it may be true and we're going to figure that out. But I'm watching you, right, buddy? Honest Iago. I'm gonna, you know? And I think that immediately makes it much harder for Iago to follow his trajectory, right? It's much more compelling actor choice because you set up these impediments that he has to pursue his objective through, right? He's also dealing with this killer, right? Othello's a killer. Othello, and we need to see that in the beginning of the play, right? He is a dangerous man, and if you're going to go and poke this lion, you're going to either take some lumps or know how to get out of the way really quickly, you know. But this making the monkey dance thing that has become the play is not only insulting, but it's boring at this point. It's not even novel. It's not even, you know. So again, we're back to how do we find the better play? You know?
Yeah, so, in a way, yeah, it's like deconstructing all of the apparatus, the sedimented history of Othello that's turned this into a minstrel show, right? And then taking that apart and saying, what story can we tell using these raw materials, right? Let's tell a more complex story of an intelligent, smart, right? A smart, motivated, interesting person, a character like Othello, right? Who is not going to just be like, oh, I'm, you know, just going to take Iago at his word, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's more interesting for everybody and interesting for the audience, but also for the actors in your performance, right? Because Iago then has a thing to push against. To not to say, okay, well, Othello then is essentially palatable and not dangerous, right? Contained, right? But to have genuine interactions and then see what happens, right?
And how do you get an audience that you can convince that, because the play's 400 years old, they all know the story, right? They all know what's going to happen, right? But if you've done this right, you convince them that Iago might lose. He might not get there. And you convince them that love might pull this out, right? There are moments where you think, that love is too real and too deep for this to happen. How can you heighten those with these characters? I think there's ways. I think there's ways. And the audience walks away seeing an Othello. It's like, holy shit. That was like, they need to be able to leave humming the Willow song. It has to have me. It can't be some early modern ditty that's totally insignificant. That's tacked on these stupid words like all the Shakespeare songs, that you hear once and you never hear it again, right? We need a song that means something, right? And it's totally, truly relevant to this moment,
Yeah.
And in this version that I've been working on, she's singing about this song that Barbary sang was about, she has that line, she was in love and she loved proved mad. And nothing is ever made of that. But it's not about a jilting. It's about somebody losing their mind. Like somebody you're like losing a loved one to Alzheimer's, right? You wake up one morning and they're just not there anymore, right? He wandered off, because he went nuts. And in this moment, Desdemona's looking at this situation, and for all intents and purposes, he's lost his mind, right? She hasn't done anything. She can't figure out where that person went, right? And death is in the offing, right? She's fully aware that this moment is critical. She's thinking back on, like wives of abusers do, did I not see the signs? Was I not looking for them, right? Did I let this happen, right? And all that is apparent in Barbary's song, which she has heard from the time she was a little girl, but it's always just Barbary's song. All of a sudden, it means something. Oh shit, that's what she was singing about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's theater. That's the moment, right?
Yeah, it makes Desdemona way more interesting. So she's not just this cookie cutter character as well, right? And it creates more tension, because right now Emilia becomes the only option, right, for any kind of female agency in that play, right? Whereas, but Desdemona as also the person who sings, right? The person who sings is in a powerful position on stage, right? To have a kind of narrative arc that supports that key moment, right, of the Willow song towards the end of the play, I think is really powerful. Vim,
I'm so sorry to just barge in here, but this is actually in line with one of the questions that Dr. Carla Mazzio and her students have sent. They want to hear a little more about women's voices in American Moor, and specifically, they note very rightly that your play draws on a number of female voices in addition to male characters. So, of course, you have Titania, Juliet, and Cordelia comes in. And so they want to know if you can talk about the role of women in American Moor and how women or women's voices work for the actor's development and challenges.
Wow. Great questions. It's kind of like a lot of questions. I think that we all know Shakespeare's women get really very short shrift, but there are those who say insanely and enduring powerful things that are beautiful, who are given all the eloquence that the men are given at moments, and you find those and you say, I want to play that character too. If you're a lover of Shakespeare like I am, say, I want to be that character, and I don't know how many actors agree with me or mirror my thoughts about that. But you know, the poetry of Shakespeare is just so sublime that I wanted to be everybody. I wanted to be everybody who says something beautiful. You know, I want the opportunity to do that, and we all should have that opportunity. I think as a director, my tendency is to want to, whatever play it is want to give the female characters it's like giving Shakespeare, giving Othello agency. You know, we're taking plays that are flawed, right, and saying they're ours now. How can we give this character more agency, make them more interesting to play, make it more of a playing challenge for an actor, to give this female character some power that an audience takes away, saying, I've never seen it played that way before. I think that Desdemona, as written and as Erika says, you know, isn't really that strong a character. Though I think she was, in Shakespeare's mind, I think she was meant to be. I think she was meant to be the epitome of unconditional love. And she has an intellect. We see it, we hear it, and it is. I am very much a champion of that character, and would want to see more of that in performance or in any production that I was going to do. I also, with regards to American More, I also see those powerful women mirrored in my life and in their relationship to me. So any role we take on, we're looking for the connective tissue between us and the character, right? We're looking for the stuff that allows us inroads into who the character is. And that was immediately apparent to me in Othello, the sexual agency of women who, in my culture, were not supposed to be attracted to me, and had to deal with whatever that brought them if they wanted to maintain contact and relationship. And it's interesting that even 400 years ago, you have Brabantio. It's no different than now. You know, you can have your black friends, you can have black people you like, but you don't want any of them to marry your daughter, right? I love black people, but yeah, that becomes another thing, right? And I think, you know, how do I say this? I mean, I run the risk of, you know, I'm treading a fine line between sounding sexist. I don't really want to, but you know, the beauty of the feminine takes many forms, and it's a very huge and important thing in my life. My life would be dark and tragic without that presence of women, you know, and what that is, and all the myriad things that is. So I look for it. I would be looking for it as a director in any of those characters. There was some stuff that spoke directly to that in American More that was excised because it was just finding the briefest, straightest dramatic arc that exists in the appendices, you know, that you can read. We put a little bit of it back in there, but there was so much. The thing about a play like that is you can riff on so many subjects in any direction and go, and then you have a 5-hour-long play because you're trying to address all the complexities that accompany these issues, you know, the play treats on. That was one that I was sorry to see go, you know, in its bigger form, but it's still there. Does that at all address the question?
Yeah, and in fact, it also addressed another question Amberine Dadavoy had about the role of Desdemona and how it's shifted over the course of the early versions of the play and where it is now. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Can I just pop in here in relation to this question of gender, because it's related to sexuality as well, right? And one of the things that comes up early in American More, right, is the desire to play Titania, right? And the anxiety around with cis heterosexual men, right, is often around the question of effeminization is going to be dangerous, okay, because it will be associated with being gay. And so one of the things that I think is powerful about American More is that it offers the opportunity to say, you know, we, in voicing a character, right, that is not actually gendered necessarily. Okay, it gets gender imposed onto it when the body of the actor embodies it on stage, right? And that's just like race in that sense. Okay, but you want to play Titania and Juliet and so forth because the poetry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of you may know this. I wanted to play King Lear so badly, okay, but no one was going to cast me as King Lear. I was going to get cast as Titania because, you know, exotic other. So one of the things that we have then in the possibility is, especially if American More were performed not just by you but by others, if I imagine a future where, you know, you get you know, where it becomes this kind of powerful thing that becomes a kind of piece that many people can play, to have productions that can actually leverage that to open up some of those categories that race is constructed, that gender is constructed, that sexuality is constructed. Here is how we construct it. Here is where it happens, right? And that we speak those lines, and some of those lines may have particular reference with a TS, right? In some particular person of a particular sex, but it isn't inherently gendered in that way. So then we can open up exactly how women are produced on stage, right? As well as therefore how race is produced, how sexuality is produced and so forth on stage actively, right? And so that's one thing that would be interesting, especially if students perhaps who are studying the play decide to do scenes from it themselves as an assignment or something like that. Vim?
Just looking through the questions, I'm sorry. I have, gosh, so many. Okay. We have a Hofstra student here asking, along with the lack of education, do you think family and community pushback stops people of color from pursuing their artistic dreams and trying to change the institution? And I know your pop comes up in American. So I'd like to hear that too. This is from Jacqueline Blaine.
Sure. You know, I think that the African American community has some introspection and work to do in support of itself always, and it has always been the case. Which is not to say that that isn't so, because again, because of slavery, because of the evolution of Black culture within this larger American culture. So that is so. My parents didn't push back. My parents were very, very supportive, but I know that that happens. You know, elders looking for ways for you to be sure you can support yourself, buy property, create wealth, which is so missing in the community. How can you do that? It is all out of a form of love, sometimes rather misguided. But I tell actors, you know, or creatives or artists all the time, or aspiring artists, they say, what do I do? What advice do you have? The first advice is, well, if you can do something else, go do that, because, you know, you'll have an easier opportunity. I mean, you know, many more opportunities and easier time overall. But if this is what you do, how do you deny yourself that? It is probably what you are here for. You have to pursue your purpose. You have to fight against that. And that requires great bravery, right? And great strength, because everything that they say about you may be proven true. You may never make a dime. But you have to weigh what is the value for you, and I would add, you know, I would add to that as sort of a parting shot. You know, you never know what the value is going to be for the rest of us if you do what you're supposed to do, right? You know, you have a responsibility to do what you're supposed to do, and to sit down and figure out what that is and begin to do it, irrespective of what you know, mom and dad are afraid of.
My parents literally thought that when I said, oh, I think I want to be an English major and I want to study Shakespeare, they were like, oh no. Oh no. They said, you can do that as a hobby. Okay.
What do they say now?
They say, well, you actually made it happen. Now they actually, what they say is, you know, they go to parties and they brag on it. They wait for all their friends to brag about that, not during COVID, but prior to COVID, right? They go to parties, they wait there for their friends to brag, my son's a doctor, my daughter's a, you know, engineer, whatever. And then my dad pops up, my daughter's a Shakespeare professor, in silence, right? Because it doesn't happen in the Asian American community. Okay, you don't go into the humanities and you don't go into white people fields. Like, let me tell you what your most canonical author thinks. Okay, what the plays mean. I mean, come on, all right? So you can understand their anxiety, but the question that Jacqueline asks is like, really it's like, they come from a place of love, but it's like, how bad do you want it? I wanted it real bad. I wanted it real bad and nothing was going to stop me. And if that's the case, if you can find something else to do with your life, I strongly encourage you to do it, okay? Because like academia and the arts is not for the faint of heart, okay? And there are many, as Keith says, like reasons why they will be proven right. The likelihood of my failure was very high, okay? But it's like, this is what I have to do. It's a calling, it's a vocation. It's not just a job, you know? It's like, you know, divine, you know, inspiration in that sense, right? Passion. You're like, this is what I have to do. I want it real bad. And I don't care what obstacles are thrown my way. We're just going to keep going. You know, people who don't believe in me, whatever, often, right? That happened regularly, kind of continuously. You know, it's like, I don't care. I'm just going to do it.
Thanks to both of you on that. I'm going to combine two questions that are a little bit related. One says, and this is from Dr. Valerie Kleiman-Pye, who whose students are also reading American More. And the second half of it is on from Kim Hall, and it's, how do you think that American More is helping to shape our perspective of who Shakespeare is for? And then the flip side is, when we gain an audience, do we lose another in presenting a play like this or Shakespeare in this way?
These are charged political questions. If I am to take what the feedback I'm getting from academia, including, you know, on the high school level, reading the things that these students write and letters that they write me, I think that the play is having this huge impact. How many of those people will, across, you know, race and gender spectrums as well. We have no idea how many of those people are going to be artists of one type or another, but we also know that American More just speaks to being who you are and being seen and seeing people in general. So in terms of purpose, you know, I think it's affecting lots and lots of lives, and that's a great thing. And I think it can continue to do more. Losing one audience if we gain another, there is the segment that, as I said earlier, it is just too inconvenient a truth, the play. And they will speak out against it. There have been those. There have been people in the white American theater structure, you know, playwrights and producers and critics who say, fuck this, this is no. And they'll give you some reasons. They'll give you one reason or another. But when you weigh it against the huge masses of people who are having these, as I say, very visceral responses to the play, and they're all a bit different. They're all having, you know, it means something very specific to them, moving them in very specific ways. I have to go back to them and say, you know, I just think you're afraid. And that's the portion of the society that is holding this shift, you know, this sort of sea change that is trying to happen back. It's always fear. It's always, if this is so, then what does that make me? If changing this creates me in a less privileged, less powerful position, how can I be for that? How can I give that up for me, for my family, for the things that, you know, that for where all that wealth lives, you know? So I think that's happening. Until we're having as large a discussion about this play, you know, nationally and internationally as we can, we won't know, you know, what the majority of the culture is feeling or doing with regard to it. But I think it looks pretty good, you know, for the future of the play. You know?
So here's one of the things that I think about this particular question. So there are two questions really, right? Valerie's question and Kim's question, both wonderful. Is that there's two different audiences. There's the actual audience in this concrete sense of who's actually reading or seeing the play performed, okay? And then how do they feel? And then there's the audience that's implied by the play, okay? The play projects onto the actual audience an imagined audience. And one of the things that's interesting about the play is precisely the way in which it forces the audience to look at themselves, right? Because the director's sitting with you, okay? And that level of introspection is not necessarily comfortable for most people. People shy away from that, right? But when you cultivate a particular version of audience gaze, because people want to dissociate themselves from the white director in the play, they'd be like, I'm not like that. Okay, you've affectively produced in them some division. They're like, okay, I don't want to be that. And they may go through, like, they twist themselves into pretzels to avoid identifying with that character. But they may see themselves, they're like, oh yeah, I did think Othello was about jealousy. Okay, oh man, I did think, well, he should be more deferential towards the senators and all that, okay? But one of the things I think that happens is that you can produce in the actual audience, the actual people who are seeing the play, experiencing the play, a sensation that can actually change them, right? So that it more closely aligns with the audience that's being produced by the play. So, you know, I think that ultimately, to say, you know, we cultivate new audiences or we lose other audiences is, as a zero-sum game, buys into the fiction that audiences aren't malleable, even though I totally take your point that, I mean, there's institutional material consequences to this, right? Because there's tickets being sold and money coming in or not coming in as a result. But that's why I'm thinking, like, I'm imagining you know, I have a lot of ideas and theories that don't go anywhere, i.e. they don't happen in real life. But I want to see American Moors top billing with Othello as the opening teaser, right? You know, you get your Othello skit, right? Like the drolls that they had in the late 17th century, which were shortened versions of just the little bits of Shakespeare's plays, like Beatrice and Benedick or whatever, right? That were, like, you know, cute little segments. We can have, you know, Shakespeare as the subsidiary, right? With American Moor as the main course. And so anyhow, so that's something I was thinking about.
I think there's also this idea of the mainstream theater culture flocking to the play because it has somehow reached this position of being the thing to do, right? The thing to see, a la slave play, or, you know, or whatever else, right? It's like people sitting in that theater afraid to say, this is weird, I'm uncomfortable, I want to leave, you know? They go there, they sit there, they take their medicine because it is the thing, right?
The community norm. This is what you're supposed to do if you want to be this kind of person in the audience, right? And so this is what I mean about producing and performing the world we want to be into existence. We perform, like, you're the kind of audience that's going to self-reflect, aren't you? Because you're with us. No, you're a good person. You're the kind of person who thinks about race and thinks about your own white privilege, right? And your racialized gaze. Yeah.
And
good.
will that Erika, will that make change, or does it only make change until that person who you have spoken to and brought along in that way comes up against something where their privilege is still very obviously theirs, right? When they come up against, I can buy this house, but that guy can't. Are they going to at that moment realize, oh, that's right, no, I'm supposed to be the good person that Erika told me I was? Or do they, or does that all become moot again?
I think it's a moment by moment thing. And part of what, so in academic theory, right, there's this notion of interpolated subjects, meaning that you continuously call somebody something and then they start to identify and adopt that theory, that calling themselves. This most obviously happens with the case of gender, right? Or citizens, right? To say, oh, I'm an American and so on, right? And then some of us are not allowed to be properly within that category. But in any case, I think in a way, what we're doing is to interpolate to the point where people start to internalize, okay, where they identify on their own and they start thinking this whole idea of money doesn't make any sense. Money is a giant mass hallucination, okay? The idea that this is somehow important, okay? What's important is I feel better when I share what I have with somebody else. That's what's important, right? I reach out, I connect, right? I don't need all this stuff. What I need is a roof over my head just to cover me from the elements, right? But I will feel terrible if somebody else doesn't have that. I will feel awful. I will feel better if I actually, embrace all of the world as part of my community, right? This is the process.
Well, I am terribly sad to say there are many, many other questions that people wanted answers to, and we are out of time at this point. But, and I include myself among them because I really wanted to ask Keith some questions about race in the soap opera industry. But I will spare you all. A couple things to tie up our discussion. I'll close this out with one last question. But first I want to say, if you want more of all of this kind of conversation, more Othello, more American More, go to the Red Bull Theater website. They're doing an event tonight where you'll see again both of our speakers, and they also have a recording of a performance that you can see as well, and a series of seminars called Othello 2020, where you can hear some very, very esteemed professors, and again, Keith, talk about the play Othello. The last question was just about the courage that it must have taken, given the power structures in American More, or in the theater industry. What gave you the courage to write it? That's from Professor Inika Murakami. And then a sort of complement to that, what do you do for self-care? This is a question from, sorry, I just lost the name. He saw your Red Bull event. This is Eric Brinkman, and says that he knows it takes a lot to perform Othello. And so what do you do? So the courage to put it on and take care of yourself after.
Yes, it's difficult just because of all the things that the American theater is, which is to say, your self-care is not their concern. You're showing up and doing a show that night and them taking the box office is their concern, right? And the unions, help some, they try to, but that's the whole thing as well. You sleep, you eat, you try to exercise, you meditate, you love yourself. I mean, I'm big on that, and I'm big on telling students, you first. If you don't love you, if you don't take care of you, you are no good to any of us. You cannot. Your health is your greatest gift to us. So I embody that as much as I can. And I have had the means, I have had situations, I've been blessed with situations that allow me to do that. And another actor might not have those situations. It might be much harder and therefore much more courageous an act for another actor to do what I do, which is not to say it hasn't been a tough road and continues to be. The play evolved out of all that road was. And it just sort of came out of me in a fit of anger after a particular audition. you know, and that's a longer story I'll tell some other day, but needing to say and do something that would vent that. And so there were these energies in the piece that colleagues of mine said, there's something very unique here, continue to look at it and continue to shape it. And so that's where that road started. There was a lot of rewriting, but the immediate validation of this work as important. Something's channeling through you, you know. So it was less at that point an act of bravery than just an awareness that this has purpose and I need to pursue it.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate both of our speakers and all of the people who took the time to come to the event and watch the performance. Again, you can see more at the Red Bull Theater's website. And also, I'll just give a shout out to Twitter, where you can go to the hashtag Shake Race, the hashtag coined by Kim Hall, and you'll see a lot of great work being done on race and performance in Shakespeare there. Everybody have a great night, and thank you again so much for coming.